Trump has been trying to make the argument, especially that regulations and environmental regulations inconvenience the average American. They hurt the economy and cost jobs. But of course, these regulations almost always have corresponding benefits. They create jobs, they save human lives, they make life better and healthier for the tens of millions of Americans living downstream from polluting industries that were once unregulated. That's the reality we need to think about as we approach this anniversary of Earth Day. It's been 50 years and it's inspired some of the most beneficial environmental laws and regulations of our time, starting with the Clean Air Act of 1970. In the first 20 years after passage, that law cost $523 billion. The United States EPA is estimated, but it produced 2.2 or 22 trillion in benefits for public health and the economy. It's a lot of money. In reality, even industry often ends up benefiting. After initially opposing regulations to avoid short-term costs and disruption, laws requiring a deposit on returnable cans, for instance, have enabled manufacturers to produce finished products at significantly lower cost. Using recycled aluminum consumes less than 10% of the energy needed to produce virgin aluminum with bauxite or oil or from a mine. Likewise, industry at first fiercely opposed toxic release inventory rules, which required companies to report the toxics they emit. But under regulatory pressure, companies developed better monitoring and control measures to prevent billions of tons of costly material and profits from being lost up the smokestack. Now, on the other hand, manufacturers who managed to avoid regulation by concealing the risk of PFAS, this is used in Teflon, and related pollutants now face huge cleanup and liability costs, a story that's detailed in the new book, The Triumph of Doubt. So, Barron's recently reported that 4 such companies, DuPont and 3M among them, have lagged in the stock market because of potential liability representing almost 25% of their total worth. Pushing regulatory rollbacks without regard for benefits has been Trump administration's policy goals from the start. An executive order from January of 2017, Trump ordered agencies to identify 2 regulations to repeal for every one being proposed, and limited the total increase in cost to no more than 0. In fact, that order used the word cost 18 times and benefit only once, and that was to assert that the order did not create any. Since then, the administration has rolled back, or is in the process of rolling back, some 95 different environmental regulations. A 2019 analysis from New York University put the cost of one such rollback of the Obama-era Clean Power Plant rules that were aimed at limiting climate change emissions at an additional 1,630 premature deaths and 48,000 lost working days per year. Another attempted rollback, allowing rebuilt truck engines with emissions 40 to 55 times above current standards, would have caused 41,000 premature deaths per decade, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association. That rollback ultimately failed, with Volvo and other truck manufacturers pointing out that, environmental benefits aside, the existing regulation creates new manufacturing jobs. Emphasizing regulatory costs was originally a Republican idea, though with benefits included. An executive order by President Ronald Reagan in February 1981 centralized cost-benefit analysis in the White House and blocked any economically significant regulation unless the potential benefits to society outweigh the potential costs to society. So, New York Times reported that that was to stem the tide of unnecessary and excessive regulations that administrative officials and business executives say have been a severe and growing burden to the nation's economy. It's only in recent years that we see this backlash against cost-benefit analysis by many of the organizations who supported it originally. And that's because, as we've gotten more sophisticated about quantifying benefits, it's become very clear that most of these environmental regulations are hugely net beneficial to society. If we didn't put these regulations in place, we as a society are just leaving money on the table. So, this move to discredit benefits began as a result of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. They targeted acid rain emissions from coal-burning power plants, mostly located in the Midwest. As usual, industry predicted a regulatory apocalypse, with the Business Roundtable estimating that cutting these emissions of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide would cost $104 billion a year, and one utility foresaw the potential economic destruction of the Midwest economy. In fact, the actual cost came in far lower than anyone expected, just $500 million or $2 billion a year by current estimates. But the real surprise was that the benefits were so big, between 59 to 116 billion every year. Moreover, these benefits had far less to do with reduced acid rain than with unpredicted corollary effects on human health from reducing air pollution. At the time, the paradigm was that all politics, all pollution is local. Now, soot and other pollution that made a big difference for human health was thought to have come from nearby sources. But as this new law went into effect, it was a major discovery that what you and I breathe is determined every bit as much by pollutants that are transported over long distances from remote sources. Pollutants from Midwest power plants were drifting with the wind, not just causing acid rain for forests and water bodies, but also sickness and death for residents across the northeastern states. According to the current EPA estimate, the health benefits from regulating that pollution included 2.4 million fewer cases of aggravated asthma, 200,000 fewer heart attacks, 5.4 million fewer lost school days, 17 million fewer lost work days, and 237 fewer premature deaths every single year. Benefits have exceeded costs by a ratio of 30 to 1, adding up to a total economic gain through 2020 of $2 trillion. In response, the Trump administration has tried multiple attacks to skew cost-benefit calculations back in favor of deregulation. Caitlin McCoy, also an attorney at the Environmental and Energy Law Program, listed a few such tactics. So, the administration has stopped counting corollary benefits, focusing instead only on benefits from reducing the pollutants directly targeted by a regulation, and not other pollutants reduced at the same time. The proposed repeal of the mercury and air toxic standards, or MATS, for power plants, for instance, disregards the incidental reduction in small particle, or PM2.5 pollution, and thus subtracts most of the 11,000 premature deaths and 540,000 missed workdays. MATS prevented those every year. Now, utilities, on the other hand, have acknowledged the benefits of the regulation, with Exelon Corp recently calling the repeal unnecessary, unreasonable, and universally opposed by the power generation sector. When regulations lead to benefits beyond the minimum set by the United States National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the administration no longer counts those benefits. To justify rolling back climate change regulations, the administration has stopped counting potential worldwide benefits at about $42 a ton and focused exclusively on benefits for the United States at $7 a ton, ignoring the reality that climate change is a global phenomenon. Now, where climate change regulations had been applied to energy efficiency savings, say for instance when a utility switches from coal to gas, the Obama administration classified that as a reduction on the cost side of the balance sheet. But to make these regulations appear more expensive, the Trump administration subtracted a lot of other benefits and then moved savings from increased energy efficiency over to the benefit side of the equation. So it's kind of like cooking the books. And of course, the administration has repeatedly sidelined scientists and pushed rules that would severely limit reliance on major scientific studies to assess and reduce risks to human health. Economists have, for the most part, rolled their eyes at the administration's convoluted and sometimes wildly improbable maneuvers to make regulatory benefits vanish. At one point, to justify rolling back the Obama-era car fuel efficiency standards, the administration magically converted an estimated $88 billion benefits into a $230 billion cost. Companies and their investors, meanwhile, have increasingly come to acknowledge that environmental regulations can yield bottom-line benefits. Even if some continue to predict an apocalypse, what they really want are rational, carefully thought-out regulations. They want to know the rules of the game so they can plan long-term investments. They want to plan on a level field, and they don't want to compete with cheaper products from companies that don't meet the same pollution and worker safety standards. They want regulations that help them become more competitive in the global marketplace. And they want to be able to assure the public that they work to high environmental standards. Smart companies, says Dan Esty of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, learn to use regulatory change to think about new ways of doing business. They can use that opportunity to drive innovation and to produce breakthroughs in cost control or product design that will give them a chance to be more profitable or to get greater market share. He saw that firsthand, he said, working in 1990 as a senior official in the Environmental Protection Agency. He and EPA Administrator William K. Riley were in London negotiating amendments to the Montreal Protocol to phase out chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. These are the refrigerants implicated in the depletion of the Earth's protective ozone layer. And literally, that delegation's instructions were not to agree to a full phase-out until we got a call from the White House. He picked up the call when it came in. The voice on the other end said, the CEO of DuPont was in the office today and says, no problem, let's go with a full phase-out. DuPont then had a $500 million business in CFCs. But in the face of intense pressure for regulation, someone at the company did some calculations and realized that DuPont could become an even larger player in the market for a CFC substitute. It was the most clear and extreme example of a company coming to understand that its business would be better with a regulatory framework, said Etsy. Now, that full framework and phase-out went forward, and today, 30 years later, the ozone hole over Antarctica has begun to close, and the predicted catastrophic effects of ozone depletion have been avoided. We can make changes if we want to.